There seems to be an unspoken law in evolution. When nature gives an animal a weapon, it usually makes them stronger, faster, or better at surviving. Claws sharpened to slash, teeth built to crush, horns designed to gore. Again and again, evolution rewards the creatures that can defend themselves or dominate others. And when it comes to tails, the story is usually no different. From whips to clubs to grasping hands, tails have been among evolution's most reliable tools. But as with any rule, there's always an exception, a rare moment when nature arms a creature with something so bizarre, so poorly suited to the body it was attached to, that it became less of an advantage and more of a liability. This is the strange case of the Stegosaurus tail, a weapon that looked fierce but may have doomed its own species. To understand how something could go so wrong, we first have to look at how right tails usually are. Evolutionary history is littered with examples of animals whose tails became their greatest survival tools. For cats, a tail is a balancing rod, letting them sprint, leap, and land with precision. For monkeys, it's a grasping limb, capable of holding branches and sometimes even food. For reptiles, tails can be detachable decoys, breaking off in a predator's mouth while the lizard scurries to safety. And in the dinosaur world, tails were often their most creative inventions. Some dinosaurs used them for balance, others for display, and still others turned them into weapons. The Ankylosaurus, for example, wielded a massive bone club at the end of its spine, strong enough to shatter the leg of a Tyrannosaurus. Even today, we see echoes of this design in modern reptiles. Crocodiles whip their tails with bone-crushing force. Kangaroos use them as stabilizers in boxing matches. The pattern is clear. Tails work. And then there's the Stegosaurus. The Stegosaurus was one of the strangest animals ever to walk the earth. With its tiny head, walnut-sized brain, arched back, and massive bony plates rising like sails, it looked like something assembled from spare parts. But its most infamous feature was its tail, a long, muscular whip ending in 4 lethal spikes. Paleontologists call this structure the thagomizer, a name born from a cartoon but now used in science. At first glance, the thagomizer seems brilliant. Swing that tail at the right moment, and any predator, whether an Allosaurus or Ceratosaurus, would find themselves skewered. Fossil evidence even shows puncture wounds in predator bones that match Stegosaurus tail spikes. In theory, this tail gave Stegosaurus a fighting chance against meat-eaters far faster and more intelligent than itself. But here's where the problem begins. While the tail looked like a perfect weapon, the body it was attached to wasn't built for precision or speed. The Stegosaurus was slow. Its legs were mismatched, short forelimbs, long hind limbs, giving it an awkward, almost hunched stance. Its brain was shockingly small, barely larger than a lime, which meant slow reaction times and clumsy coordination. Imagine swinging a spear while half asleep. That's essentially what the Stegosaurus was doing every time it tried to use its tail. Even if it landed a devastating hit once in a while, the margin for error was huge. Miss the strike, and the predator was already on top of you. Then there was the risk factor. The tail spikes weren't just dangerous to predators, they may have been dangerous to the Stegosaurus itself. Swing too wide, stumble or miscalculate, and those spikes could slash into its own flanks or legs. Unlike a controlled club, the thagomizer was 4 sharp blades jutting in unpredictable directions. What looks like a deadly weapon on paper may have been more of a liability in practice. And finally, energy. Carrying and growing those spikes came at a cost. Bone and keratin are expensive for a body to maintain. For an animal that already needed huge amounts of food to survive, the thagomizer may have been an extravagant expense for limited payoff. In short, evolution gave the Stegosaurus a dramatic tail, but one that didn't match the rest of its body. A weapon that looked impressive, but functioned clumsily. A defense that worked sometimes, but not consistently enough to secure long-term survival. If the Stegosaurus shows us what happens when evolution arms an animal badly, the Ankylosaurus shows us what happens when it gets everything right. Ankylosaurus came millions of years after the Stegosaurus disappeared, but the two are often compared because they both took the same evolutionary gamble, turning their tails into weapons. Only Ankylosaurus perfected what Stegosaurus fumbled. Picture a walking tank. Ankylosaurus had thick armor plates covering its back, neck, and even eyelids, and at the end of its spine sat a massive club of fused bone. Unlike the spiky, unpredictable Thagomizer, this weapon was simple and brutally effective. It was one solid mass, easy to aim, hard to miss with. When the tail swung, it concentrated force into a single crushing blow. Studies suggest it could deliver enough impact to break the bones of even the largest predators, including Tyrannosaurus rex. And here's the critical difference. Ankylosaurus was built for its weapon. Its body was low to the ground, stable, with strong hind limbs and a stiffened tail optimized for controlled strikes. It wasn't a gamble, it was a masterpiece. The Ankylosaur family thrived for millions of years, while the Stegosaur line dwindled and eventually vanished. In the story of evolutionary weapons, one tail became a triumph, the other a failure. So why did the Stegosaurus end up with the short end of the evolutionary stick? To understand, we have to remember how evolution really works. Nature doesn't design with blueprints, it experiments. Mutations appear randomly, and the ones that happen to give a survival advantage spread through a population. But those advantages are always tied to a specific time and place. For the Stegosaurus, the Thagomizer probably did work, at least for a while. Against mid-sized predators of the Jurassic, even a clumsy swing might have been enough to scare them off. Fossil records show it occasionally succeeded. The problem is that environments change, predators adapt, and what once worked can quickly become obsolete. By the time ecosystems shifted, Stegosaurus was locked into its design. It couldn't evolve fast enough to keep pace. Its tiny brain limited behavioral adaptations. Its body was inefficient for energy use, and its iconic tail, instead of saving the species, may have only delayed the inevitable. This is why we can call it the tail where evolution went wrong. Not because it wasn't deadly in the moment, but because it couldn't secure long-term survival. It was a flashy solution, not a sustainable one. Stegosaurus isn't alone in this category. Throughout Earth's history, evolution has produced designs that look brilliant, but prove to be dead ends. Take the giant antlers of the Irish elk, so massive and heavy they may have hindered the animal more than helped it. Or the saber teeth of Smilodon, impressive for hunting, but prone to breaking and limiting diet choices. Nature is full of these experiments, features that thrived briefly only to vanish when conditions shifted. The Stegosaurus tail stands out because it looks like the ultimate dinosaur weapon, yet in reality it was closer to a flashy gimmick, a reminder that evolution isn't about perfection, it's about being good enough for now. The Stegosaurus tail is a paradox written in bone. On one hand, it was fierce enough to puncture predator bones and frighten Jurassic hunters. On the other hand, it was awkward, risky, and ultimately unsustainable. It was both a symbol of survival and a sign of why the Stegosaurus vanished. When we think of evolution, we often imagine a straight march toward improvement. But the Thagomizer reminds us that evolution is messy. It creates monsters and miracles, successes and failures. Sometimes the most iconic features of a creature's body, the parts we imagine as its greatest strengths, are the very things that seal its fate. So, the next time you picture a Stegosaurus, tail spikes raised like spears against a charging predator, remember this: evolution didn't always get it right, and for this dinosaur, the tail that should have saved it may instead have been the tail where evolution went wrong.